shouldn't take too long. And then provide some, I think maybe some legal background on the issue that might be helpful. And then we'll be taking testimony later in the week from other parties. And we'll see how, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I think we may be able to move fairly quickly on this. It is H603. I think Heather's just going to walk us through what's there. She's going to give us an overview of it, so we don't need to be looking at the language at this point.
Not at all.
Okay.
No, and since we are running over time, I will be so brief in it. But I'll start with the purpose of the bill, which is to repeal the requirement that poultry slaughtered under one of the 3 exceptions to inspection may only be sold as whole bird from the farm at a farmer's market or to a food restaurant. And so effectively what the bill is doing is just removing the language that says whole bird for each of the 3 exemptions to inspection, allowing farmers, producers, growers to part out the bird as opposed to only being able to sell a whole bird, which will really open up quite a significant amount of revenue for farmers to be able to expand into that production arena. And currently, Vermont is following USDA federal guidelines. So the 3 tiers are 1,000, 5,000, and 20,000. So we wouldn't be going against any current federal regulations. This wouldn't jeopardize Vermont when it comes to any kind of like state funding that we receive federally when it comes to poultry and meat processing. And that is really the bill. We're just removing the language of whole bird to allow it in each of the 3 tiers.
Representative Levitt?
So they've never had to be inspected?
So there are 5 criteria that exist within each of the tiers. And if you are following the 5 criteria that are laid out that cover things like sanitation, then you have an exemption to the inspection. And so we are expanding upon the current exemptions. But you still have to follow all of the current criteria in place in order to meet that exemption.
So like my chicken farmer, or she's my organic vegetable farmer, it does chickens on the side. She now can sell me chicken breasts. If this bill goes through, she could sell chicken breasts and thighs and not have to just sell me a whole bird.
If she was already following the 5 existing criteria,
she is
under whichever tier she existed, then yes.
Well, okay. I like that.
We love that.
Because I don't always want a whole bird. Sometimes
nobody does.
Want breasts sometimes.
Yeah, Representative, dumb question possibly. You use this term 1,000.
5,000 and 20,000.
Are those animals?
Yes.
Category of
those are
number of animals.
Yes, to be processed or slaughtered annually.
Thank you. Processed annually.
Yes, annually. Those are the exemption categories.
So I believe that this extends to other poultry and or rabbits, I believe. Am I wrong?
Not rabbits,
but other
poultry.
Okay.
So right now, let me see if I understand this. If I want to buy a whole chicken from my next door neighbor who's raising chickens, meat birds, and there's a certain set of existing requirements that farmer has met those requirements, the farmer can sell me the whole chicken after it's been slaughtered, whatever else might happen.
Right.
But they can't carve it into 2 breasts, 2 thighs, 2 drumsticks.
They cannot sell it. No. If it was for themselves and their personal use, they could do whatever they wanted.
And if I did want to get just a pack of thighs, I could go to the store and do that, but it wouldn't have come from that particular farm. It would come from another farm that has
been inspected. Right, either through state or federal inspection.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
So this is probably more for Mike O'Grady.
And Mike will come to the table in a minute, and you can hold it.
Maybe I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
John?
So did this bill come about because there's been a recent change with USDA regulations?
No, there hasn't. This actually isn't something that isn't not permitted. Does that make sense? It is not allowed under current USDA guidelines. So we are just trying to bring it up into compliance with what the USDA allows. They do allow you to do that, but it's by state, and our state has decided only whole birds. But the USDA,
How long ago was that?
we have had that for a long time.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
How long we have only been doing the whole bird?
2007.
2007.
Why did it take so long?
To do this currently,
Years ago.
I wasn't here yet.
Resiliency wasn't.
Right, precisely.
Sad answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very, other questions? Thank you, Heather. So now, Mike.
So I sent a document earlier and I didn't check to see if it was posted and I apologize. Could you check and see if there's a document that I sent? Maybe you didn't get it. I was gonna do the reverse of what the chair referenced. I would rather talk about the legal context first and then review the bill.
That would be fine.
So when you talk about exception to inspection, you're talking about an exception. You didn't get it? I'm sorry. Well, then I'll just discuss it kind of generally. So slaughter of animals in the United States works under what's called a cooperative federalism program. The feds adopt standards and say states can't differ from them significantly, but states can adopt the same or very similar standards and then enforce them for the feds. So that's the cooperative federalism aspect of it. The Poultry Products Inspection Act, the federal statute, says that for the purposes of slaughter of animal for sale, that the slaughter needs to be inspected. And that means that someone needs to be there while you are slaughtering the animal. And there are exceptions to that physical presence of an inspector while you are slaughtering the animal. It doesn't mean that your facility is accepted or exempt from inspection. The regulator can still do a spot inspection to determine if you're following the law, but they don't have to be there every time that you slaughter an animal. Now, there are technically 5 exceptions in the Federal Poultry Products Inspection Act and its rules, one of which is for your own use. I think everybody understands that one. Then one is if you are producing and processing 1,000 birds or less of birds that you have raised, you are not slaughtering any animals of another. And you basically only sell intrastate, not in commerce. That's the 1,000 bird exception. And then there's these 3 exceptions that are all kind of the same thing. You're producing your own, you might have a facility, you might not have a facility, et cetera, et cetera. But it basically boils down to you're processing 20,000 birds or less of your own raising according to certain specific sanitary standards. And so those are the 2 major federal ones. Until 2007, though, the state didn't have any exceptions. There were none, not even the 1001, not even the for your own use. And so in 2007, there was an effort to, let me just step back. There wasn't a for your own use in statute, but everybody knew that you could slaughter for your own use. In 2007, there was an effort to incorporate the federal standards into state statute. The agency was very concerned. They were very concerned about, A, they're always concerned about the Vermont brand, and B, the health and safety of products that were slaughtered on the farm and sold in commerce. So they were resistant to adding an exception, but ultimately what was passed was the 1,000-bird exception. And the 1,000-bird exception was in law for a while, and that was the only exception until 2016, when there was an effort to expand that, the ability for on-farm slaughter of poultry. And the agency again was resistant to going fully to 20,000. So they proposed a 5,000 limit. The 5,000 limit is not a federal standard. The 5,000 limit is a state standard. The 5,000 limit has a slightly less stringent sanitary standards requirement than the 20,000 limit. The 20,000 limit, you have to comply with what are called, and I wish I had, it's the sanitation performance guidelines for USDA. And it's things like you need to have a facility that's white wall, it's not wood, et cetera, it's metal. You need to have water. You have to have hot water. You need to have a septic tank or some sort of collection. So the sanitation performance standards are pretty significant for the 20,000 bird exception. They're not impossible. It just takes some money to build a place where you can do it that meets the 20,000. It's like it's probably more now. The last time I talked to somebody about it was like $5,000 to $10,000 to build what was necessary. And most of that cost was the water and sewer.
Are those federal requirements, or this is existing state?
So as you will see, those federal requirements are incorporated by reference into the 20,000 bird exception. Now, for the 5,000 bird exception, they could have incorporated all the federal standards for sanitation, all the sanitation performance standards, but they didn't. They spelled out what the sanitation standards are for 5,000 birds. It's pretty similar, but it's not everything. So it's a little less stringent than 20,000 birds. So if somebody's having a hard time with some of the 20,000 bird sanitation requirements, they can try to manipulate it and get into the 5,000 bird exception. With all that said, and as I referenced earlier, the agency will inspect anyone that is operating under any of the exceptions, and it's spot check authority. They can just show up. If they know you are slaughtering, they can just come and check to see what you are doing. Now, to the whole purpose of this bill, the agency from the very beginning has made the argument that every additional cut is an additional opportunity for adulteration and the spread of disease. So they have always, at least since 2017 and before, have always argued it should just be whole bird. I think they're moving off of that because there hasn't really been any issues with disease, with adulteration. There have been some misbranding issues. Because one of the things that needs to be done to qualify for the 1,000 bird or the 20,000 bird exception is you have to label that product and say your name, your address, and that it's exempt from inspection. And technically, you're supposed to put the public law number on there, but nobody really does that because nobody knows what the hell that is. But that's probably the biggest kind of like, people don't brand label their product the way that they're absolutely supposed to. So that's it. And I will send this document again. And one of the things that this document does is it breaks down the 1,000 bird and 20,000 bird exception and what you have to do for each. And, which is helpful because the rule is not the easiest thing to read. But that then brings you to H603.
Before you walk through it, Representative O'Brien's got a question.
But can you just give us a 1-minute tutorial on, just because I know I'm gonna get confused between like on-farm slaughter for all the non-chicken stuff or non-poultry, because I know there are differences.
They are different. So there's two different federal laws. There's the Federal Meat Inspection Act, which is everything except poultry. It used to include rabbits, but it doesn't include rabbits anymore because rabbits are not covered by it. I don't know really where rabbits are. And then there's the Poultry Products Inspection Act, and that's just for poultry. And they have different requirements. There is no 1,000 animal exception under the Federal Meat Inspection Act. If you are slaughtering on a farm an animal that's not poultry, it's supposed to not be sold. It's only supposed to be used by you, your employees, or your non-paying guests. And so, but that's why on-farm slaughter in Vermont is you sell the animal to the person who then slaughters it, because they can slaughter their own animal and use it for their own consumption. That's how we got around it.
And there's not like spot inspection, right, for the red meat?
No, there's not. I mean, there is a required inspection for, if you are slaughtering cows, sheep, there's supposed to be an inspector there. In what they call an official establishment. And so there are inspectors there. Many states use USDA inspectors, but Vermont operates what's called an equal to program, where they have adopted laws that are equal to the federal laws. And when a state does that and is approved, they get money to pay for state inspectors to do inspection within the state. Now, Vermont's equal to status was threatened a couple of years ago when the new FSIS crew came in and was not agreeable with the understanding that we had with the previous FSIS crew about on-farm slaughter. And they've threatened to pull equal to. There's been some congressional analysis of that, but I think right now it's just kind of status quo.
Do poultry farmers more often tell the state they're going to have an on-farm slaughter days?
You're supposed to notify the agency that you are engaged in on-farm slaughter for the purposes of sale. So that they know. It's not like you have to notify them every time you're going to, but they have to know that you are an establishment, a business that is engaged in that practice.
Let's see who was next. Go ahead.
I just have one question, which is, you can only sell from the farm, a farmer's market, directly to consumers or to a restaurant. Why can't you sell it to like a local supermarket?
So that's actually a restriction that's in the federal law.
Got it. Okay.
And so that one is consistent with the federal law. It says direct to consumers or restaurants or lodging establishments.
Okay.
You know, because it's old. It's like literally like 50s old. And so Vermont has brought it back to like restaurants, farmers markets, direct to the consumer.
Okay. I was
You
just
can't go
curious.
right to, but the issue is these exceptions are supposed to be interstate. They're not supposed to be, in commerce is the term that's used. And as they define in commerce, it's the sale between the states. And I think there's concern that if you sell to like a retail grocery store or chain, that
Yes.
has a greater opportunity to move than commerce.
Got it.
So although that might seem, so the country store in town, we currently can't sell to that, and that might seem illogical, but that's a federal law that we don't have
Right.
control over, and we can't, so nothing we can do would change that.
Well, the thing that could be done is that the agency doesn't enforce that prohibition.
We can't raise that into statute. Creating.
Under current statute, the wording is whole bird, I imagine. So, but we do up a bird to a degree when we do slaughter. So feet and other offal that is considered edible, such as liver and hearts. So is that not included in current statute, and would it be in the new adjusted statute?
So whole bird isn't defined anywhere, right? I don't know what a whole bird is.
Okay,
So can you take the neck off?
right.
I don't know. I mean, that's generally how you slaughter the animal. So that's one of the things that this amendment does. It helps clarify what can be sold. And it really takes away that limitation and that ambiguity about what is the whole bird. So the feds don't have any restriction based on whole bird. There's no whole bird requirement there. Arguably, Vermont was out of its equal to status by having the whole bird, but USDA probably said it was more strict and more protective of health and safety, and therefore prevented adulteration at a greater degree than the feds. It's probably why they approved it, but it doesn't have to be there.
Wondering about packaging current and if there's any changes in this bill with federal or state, like, is there a current rule that, like with a whole bird, you can only sell one per package? And like going forward, would you be able to put breasts of multiple birds in the same packages? I know that the agency, food safety concern is based on traceability if there's a problem type of thing. I'm just wondering how that is currently and how it would be.
So if you're under the 20,000 bird and you go to the sanitation standards, there are some requirements for packaging, but it doesn't get to the level of you can't intermix birds.
So there's nothing that's gonna inhibit people from being able to put, 20 chicken wings
Right.
and sell it. Okay. That's all I was wondering.
Representative O'Brien?
I just wonder, Mike, does Vermont have any USDA inspected chicken processing plants?
Yes,
They do.
yes. There are poultry plants where USDA will come and do inspection, like Misty Knoll.
Has that slaughter facility? Like if I had 5,000 chickens, I could take them all there and they would do them?
They're probably just gonna do their own.
Right, yeah,
But then they sell in commerce.
right.
And then, once they're selling across state lines, they need that federal inspector.
But the spec ones, we don't really have, it's mostly done on farm for the bigger chicken farms.
Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Like, we don't have any sort of spec ones, the way they're slaughterhouses for,
There is.
beef.
There are a couple, I think,
Yeah.
Okay.
that you can bring your birds there and they will do a process.
And those you could sell parts of.
It depends on if they have a USDA inspector there, they can sell in commerce.
Jen?
Yeah, Mike, this is more focusing on wastewater requirements, septic systems to do, whether it's 1,000 or less. What happens, we have a composting law for, food scraps. What happens to the non-liquid part of that's washed into a septic system to, or organs or other body parts? Are they required to be composted or?
There are requirements for handling of the offal. It's not required to be compost. The compost law specifically has an exception for meat and bone. And so, but I do know that many farmers you can, if you're following the RAPs, compost animal mortalities on your farm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should we walk through the bill?
Yeah, can I get into the Zoom?
I sent you the link.
Yeah, it says I'm waiting for the host to start the meeting.
This is 603 we're looking at.
Yeah. And while we're waiting, if you could pull it up, just on your own laptop, get it off of the lid page.
I'll try to rejoin.
What do you see?
So if you have it open in front of you, Section 1 amends 6 VSA 3312, which is the section in the slaughter chapter that provides the exceptions to inspection. And you'll see that in sub B, well, let me just back up. On 33, page 1, line 14, there's the 3 asterisks. There's an existing exception to inspection when you are slaughtering animals, not for human consumption, but for animal feed. So that's what's being skipped over there. Sub B is the 1,000 bird exception. You'll see inspection shall not be required for the slaughter or preparation of poultry products of the producer's own raising on the producer's premises, whether or not they are intended for use as human food, if fewer than 1,000 birds are slaughtered annually, no poultry products are offered for sale or transportation in interstate commerce, and the poultry products are only sold from the farm at a farmer's market or to a food restaurant licensed by the Commissioner of Health or are for personal use. So you'll see the whole birds criteria is struck on page 2, line 3. So it's the poultry products are only sold from the farm at a farmer's product or to a food restaurant licensed by the Commissioner of Health. Then you come to sub C, which is the 5,000 bird exemption. You will see automatically that there's a lot more requirements here. And those requirements are largely the additional sanitary requirements that are there for 5,000 birds. And you'll see not more than 5,000 birds are slaughtered annually. No poultry products are offered for sale in interstate commerce. You're striking the whole birds criteria on page 2, line 14. And then the producer's facility is not used to slaughter or process poultry by any other person. The producer does not purchase birds for resale that have been processed under the exemption. The poultry are healthy when slaughtered. The poultry are slaughtered and otherwise processed and handled under sanitary standards, practices, and procedures that result in the preparation of poultry products that are sound, clean, and fit for human food when distributed. Then you get to the 20,000 bird exception. It's very similarly structured. The big change or difference is on page 3, line 20 and 21. The poultry are slaughtered and otherwise processed and handled according to the sanitary performance standards of 9 CFR 416.1 to 416.7. And those are the provisions that require a food grade facility, drainage, septic, water, proper disposition of the offal, etc. And I can provide the committee, I'll just provide the committee, I'll send this. It has all of those provisions in it or links to those provisions. There are other things like employees' clothes need to be hygienic. They can't have like day-old blood on it. The slaughter equipment has to be clean and sanitized. It cannot have any hair or blood or animal on it. Things like that.
That's all existing, this is all.
That's all federal sanitary conditions. The last part of the bill is its effective date. It would go in effect on passage. That's one thing I would ask the agency about, whether or not they need time for the transition from the existing whole bird to ability for a farmer to process and sell their parts. I don't know what their position is on this bill. I think they're moving towards accepting it, but I'm not for sure. And I expect they'll probably want more time than passage.
We'll have the agency in later this week and can them on that.
Now, the chair told me earlier this week that there was a federal change recently, USDA. That was an organic production rule, which basically said how birds needed to be handled in order to maintain their organic status underneath the on-farm exceptions. It didn't change the on-farm exceptions, just said that organic, you need to hang the birds a certain way, et cetera. But one of the things that I think advocates will take away is it basically confirmed this exception for slaughter for these farms and said that they can be sold in intrastate commerce according to these provisions. So I didn't see a real big substantive requirement that changed. What I saw is like the implication that this is an accepted USDA practice.
So in summary, the only changes, language changes that this bill proposes are deleting the words as whole birds, yep, 3 times for each of the 3 different categories. What about, and maybe we don't have them or many of them in Vermont, but more than 20,000? If you have an operation that has more than 20,000 birds.
Then you don't qualify for the federal exemption, right? Then you have to get your product inspected when it is being slaughtered.
Either by a federal.
Or if you keep it in state, it can still be a state inspector, but it needs inspection if you're going to process more than 20,000 a year.
Yes, Representative Supernath.
And when you say inspection, for clarity, you mean just the physical presence of an inspector?
I mean, it's not just they literally walk the line and watch the birds get processed. So yes, it's the physical presence during the act of slaughtering. And that's another important thing. It has to be during your slaughter that they are there. That is inspection, and that's what the exception is to. It is not to the spot check of your facility to make sure that, you know, your workers are not covered in 3-day-old blood, that you're hanging or processing your chickens appropriately. You're not processing on wood, you know, things like that.
What other questions for Mike about the actual language here or background? So we will have other folks coming in that can just give us more the perspective of a farmer and what this might mean if you're a.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, actually somebody who's raising chickens. We'll have the agency come in. I think a couple of people from Vermont will add their insights so we can hear more about what this might mean, what the implications are. But if we've got good legal questions, probably Mike is the best one to ask. But if not, okay. Thank you. So we don't have any other testimony scheduled today. Before we all disappear for the afternoon, let's take 5 minutes to stretch and then come back and we can just go over a few housekeeping things that